Welcome to Full Timeout. I'm your host, Ari Bruckman. Joining us on the show today, we have a very special guest. She received her bachelor's degree in psychology from New York University, as well as her MA and PhD from the University of Maryland in College Park. She is a trained clinical psychologist for over 25 years, with practices in psychotherapy and coaching practices in San Francisco and New York City. She has taught classes at Lesley University as well as Harvard University, and she is the CEO and founder of Live in Their World. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the show today, Dr. Robin Rosenberg. Robin, how are you?
Hi, thanks for having me.
So, Robin, before we get into it and we talk about Live in Their World, tell some of the listeners who might not have a backstory a little bit about what generated your interest in psychotherapy and then clinical psychology to get into it.
I've always been interested in psychology, so there's no clear pivotal incident. I majored in psychology in college and, worked for a couple years and then went and got my PhD. So I've always been interested in psychology. I'm interested in people, what makes people tick, how to help people. So there's no real backstory there. It's just sort of like breathing for me.
Okay. Well, tell me this, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it was the Me Too movement that commenced.
For the story. So there's a
Yes.
Okay. So there's a really good story about how I came to start Live in Their World, the company that I founded. So I was doing some research in virtual reality. Actually, let me go further back. When I had a psychotherapy practice, I became interested in hypnosis because I was seeing a lot of people with eating disorders, and I could help them get their eating better, but their body image was slow to get to a better place. And for many women in our culture, it's just hard to have a good body image, period, because of sort of cultural factors. And so I became interested in hypnosis. I got certified in hypnosis. And in hypnosis, there's this phenomenon called divided consciousness or dual consciousness, where you can hold the reality of what you're experiencing in trance alongside knowing that your body is, sitting in my office, for instance. So you're kind of holding two realities at the same time. And about 25, 30 years ago, there was a very early psychology of virtual reality literature that described that very same dual consciousness, where in a VR headset, you're experiencing something that feels real, even though you know that you're not in wherever the VR experience is taking you. So that's how I got interested in VR. And then I was collaborating on some research in 2011 to 2013, around the time that Trayvon Martin was killed. And then there was a spate of murders of Black people by white people. And that led to the Black Lives Matter movement, which led some white people to say white lives matter. And although I don't presume to know the lived experience of being Black from writing textbooks and talking to friends and the work that I had done, I thought I knew enough to hypothesize that if we could give those white people enough of a sense of what the lived experience is and how it's different, that they wouldn't say white lives matter. They would understand the phrase Black Lives Matter. So that was a sort of pivotal set of experiences. And then I socialized with someone who was a VC, a venture capitalist and funds companies. And he thought it was a great idea, but, I had a day job I loved. And at that point, VR was tethered to very expensive computers. So if you had a headset, it was not very practical to take outside, of a home or lab. So after Me Too, the VC called me up and he said, "Remember that idea you had? We'd like to fund you to do a proof of concept for gender." And so I did that, and we got terrific results. And at that point, I thought, wow, if I can really make a difference, that's a moral obligation. And so I quit my day job as a psychologist, and I've been working on this since.
That's really, really fascinating to me. I mean, one thing I think, and I've heard you mention it again, I heard you mention it on Neil Hughes' podcast as well, and you talked about the Trayvon Martin case. What was it specifically about that case that for you, it kind of was this maybe aha moment as to where you or how you wanted to proceed with Live in Their World?
So Live in Their World wasn't, the Trayvon Martin case was just sort of the first seed. And, just thinking how horrible it was and, imagining what it must have been like. And that was, sort of the seed for me of what is it like to be someone else? And really that's what our company does. I mean, it became Live in Their World because part of what we do is put people in a headset and have you, in essence, become someone from a given demographic group. And, while you're in the headset. So, for instance, you might look down and see the hands of a Black man, right? So you are Javante, and you're at work interacting with people who are treating you, as if you were Javante. And so that was really the idea of giving people a sense of what is it to be someone from a different demographic group? What is that like?
I've heard you mention dual consciousness. That was something I thought was really, really interesting as well. What is it about the VR experience that you believe that makes it so effective that people can take that and then apply that to their actual reality? And if you could just kind of break down the idea of dual consciousness a little bit more for some of the listeners who aren't familiar with that term.
The dual consciousness in and of itself is interesting, although not pivotal. So if you're in a movie theater, really engrossed back in the pre-COVID days, really engrossed in the movie, there's a sense in which you're having an experience that isn't dissimilar to VR. Because if you're really engrossed, you almost forget that you're sitting in a theater.
So it's almost like your brain can't tell the difference. Is that?
So dual consciousness is where you're holding two different realities. You can be fully immersed in an alternate reality in many ways. VR is one of them, right? So, hypnosis is another, meditation is another, chemically induced is another, dreaming is another, or your sort of very vivid daydreaming is another. Reading a novel where you sometimes get, so immersed that you startle. It's like if there's a noise because you forgot where you were. So what VR does is it's an easy way, it's an incredibly easy way to get you into that state. A lot of other ways require more work. Reading a book requires imagining. Even in a movie theater, if you don't like the movie, you're not going to get engrossed. So it requires your participation on some level of being really willing to suspend disbelief and enter that world. But when you put on a VR headset, you're in that world. That's all you have to do to be in that world. And your actual world is gone. So it requires much less effort.
There was this really, really interesting, example you brought up. I've heard, not on this, I believe it was still on that podcast that you just talked about. There was a gentleman who, he put his headset on and he was in the position, I believe, of a woman.
Sure.
Tell a little bit about that.
Unfortunately, the example I'm going to give is not incredibly rare for women, but I think is incredibly rare for men, which is people are sitting around a conference table or someone comes over to your workstation and you're trying to together figure something out on an Excel spreadsheet or a Word document or some kind of document. And if it's the man who comes over he's oriented in a way that his crotch is quite close to the woman's face while he's standing over her looking at her computer. And when men put on the headset in particular, they often spring back when that happens, and they are made sufficiently uncomfortable that it's an incredibly powerful memory. And so a number of men who've had that our experience have told me later, months later, when I have run into them, that, they make a point never to do that, right? They always together go sit next to each other at a table. He stands really far back. They're sitting together. They do something so that they're not in that position they're very sensitive to that, which is great. That's what we want.
Definitely. So there's a certain type of behavioral change that you're trying to make with VR, right? With Live in Their World. And you refer to it as habit change.
What we're really trying to do is create a respectful workplace that addresses issues of bias and incivility of any kind. It doesn't have to be related to people's demographic identity. People are what is the phrase? I mean, can be jerks to everybody. But we know that when people are disrespectful, when their bias leads to discrimination, it creates a heavy mental burden, and it makes the workplace much more challenging, and it's a much bigger lift for employees. So our goal is to help make people both aware of bias and how it can play out, how to address it, and also just upskill people for respectful engagement. None of us is ever going to get it right all the time. And when we get it wrong, the only way we can learn we got it wrong is for someone to tell us. So we have to learn how to give and take feedback and engage in real conversations, because, we have differences. We're not all the same. We have different sensitivities. We believe different things, and things can get tense. I mean, this is this window in time in the sort of run up to the election and after the election is a good example where people on all sides can feel very strongly, and it is easy to feel disrespected by people who have a different view. And so but we all have to work together, right? Which requires cooperation, collaboration. And so it's really thinking about what does respect look like when we may disagree?
Absolutely. How do you believe the approach that you guys take in terms of this, I think you referred to it as distributed learning, as opposed to like a one and done approach or a one-off approach? Can you talk about what that looks like and how you guys implement that?
There's a lot of research on diversity and inclusion training where you're trying to help people, raise awareness or give them skills. So there'll be a one-time event with a speaker or some kind of workshop or something. And in general, the research has shown that those are not particularly effective in leading to behavior change, but even when they're very powerful, the effects fade over time. So you can make the analogy to trying to learn a language, which is if you have, a half a day language workshop and then you don't speak to anyone in that language, if you don't use it, you lose it. And so distributed learning is when, the learning is spread out over time, and that keeps it what we call top of mind, which is sort of easier to retrieve. So if you're speaking, if you're learning in half a day's worth of Spanish, and then, once a week, someone speaks to you in Spanish to the extent of your vocabulary or a little bit more, it'll keep your Spanish useful. So that's what we try to do.
Obviously, COVID-19 has presented a lot of challenges for everybody. And it's made people kind of restructure the way they live their lives. It's made businesses restructure their business models in order to kind of meet the standards, to still be profitable, to still, keep things afloat. As a result of that, they've had a lot of workers work from home, work remote. Is it concerning to you at all about the lack of face-to-face interaction that people will have in the workplace, as this is really designed to kind of give them those opportunities in that situation to use this new learned behavior on a daily basis? That if they didn't have that face-to-face interaction anymore or as much, would they still be able to change that behavior that has become so habitual over so many years?
We are still interacting face to face, just not in person. And so many of the issues that we address still happen. I mean, maybe not hovering over someone's, with someone's crotch in your face, but many of the issues that are related to bias or disrespect still happen or don't happen. Often it's omission as well as commission. What doesn't happen is what does. And that still happens whether you're meeting, remotely over Zoom or FaceTime or Skype or Teams or whatever. Or you're collaborating in Slack, from who's invited into a call versus who isn't. I mean, so all of these happen whether you're co-located in an office or you're meeting virtually. It's still the same.
For listeners, who are really learning about this sounds interesting. There is some skepticism there. They hear you talk about dual consciousness, and it just seems like there's a lot going on that might kind of scare them. What can you say to kind of reassure somebody that this is a real opportunity to improve themselves and kind of really evolve as a person by making yourself, open to these new ideas and other people's life experiences?
Two different things. So one is for people who, for any reason, don't really want to do, VR with the headset, we also do offer a program with what's called immersive video. So you don't need a headset of any kind. So if people have any concerns about that piece, just to know. But I think the larger issue is really everyone has a story to tell. And people are the heroes of their own stories, right? We all know our own backstory. We know, how our motives are pure and good. And it's much harder to understand other people's motives. And it's easy to kind of feel like, well, I'm right and they're wrong, or mine are good and theirs are, not good, or they're out to get me, or, it's about being open to other people's stories, and that most people mean well. And especially in a workplace, people want to get their work done and do their thing and do a good job and want to be treated with dignity and respect. All of us want to be treated with dignity and respect in the workplace. It may look different for different people. And that's the thing about being curious. What does that mean? I know what it looks like for me, but what does it look like for you? Right? So, as a woman, it may look different. What I perceive of as being treated with dignity and respect may be different than what it looks like for you. Because as a man, your life, your journey is de facto different. And how you get treated, that's just how it is. So your cumulative experience is different than mine. And so it's inviting people to be curious, to hear about other people's cumulative experience. I mean, there are at this moment in time, in terms of Black Lives Matter, there have been many books written, there are movies, there are all kinds of things about the prototypical Black experience, which, there is a prototypical Black experience for Black men, for Black women in the workplace. Black women kind of have a double jeopardy because they're both women and they're Black. And so, there are a lot of data to show the way that Black women are doubly disadvantaged in terms of compensation, promotion, all kinds of things. It's being open to that. We often, if we think we're doing a good job, we feel that we deserve to be recognized in that way. And all of us feel that way. So it's just being open to everyone. Everyone has a different story.
Very, very cool. So tell me, I heard you mention before, and you've mentioned this in another setting as well, and that is that if people understood the lived experience of being Black in America, and I think this is just very, very relevant for everything, but that they would be able to then say, they'd understand why, they should stop saying all lives matter or white lives matter. What is it about this experience that is so eye-opening that they're able to, over time, get that frame of mind?
I can only repeat back what people have told me who've gone through the program.
Yeah.
That part of the program. And what they say is that there's something about what we are doing where they said, I had no idea, that I knew on the one hand, but I didn't know in my heart almost. Like it's making the connection between what you may have heard and really getting it at a deeper level.
That's awesome. Tell me, Robin, where can people go to find more about you, connect with you, and find more about Live in Their World?
Great question. They're welcome to come to our website, liveintheirworld.com, or contact me, Robin at liveintheirworld.com, or info at liveintheirworld.com, and, LinkedIn, Live in Their World, any of a variety of ways.
Robin, what kind of impact do you want to have on the world and in the psychology industry when it's all said and done?
What I want is for people to have better experiences at work, is not to have, people spend an enormous amount of time and energy dealing with incivilities of any kind. Again, we talked about race a lot because that's how I got interested, but all kinds of incivility. There's always a jerk at work who makes work much more difficult than it needs to be. And we are all in turn inadvertently jerks sometimes. So I want people to be able to have a workplace that they can actually do the work. They can sort of have colleagues they feel more engaged with, and feel connected to, and more authentic, more genuine. In terms of, this is really more about workplace than psychology per se. So I don't know in terms of, one thing I would love to see is more use of virtual reality for good, for doing good in the world. I think it has a lot of potential, but like any tool, it has potential on both sides to do good and sort of inadvertently to do ill.
That's amazing. Continue to, keep that pursuit. And I would love to reconnect in the future and check in and see how things are going. I think great potential lies here, especially now with people being so open to change.
Sounds great.
Robin, thanks so much for your time. I appreciate having you on the show.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Take care.
Bye.
Guys, this is incredibly, incredibly fascinating stuff. If you haven't already, I'll post a link in the description, but it's about understanding that this VR experience is for your emotional learning and emotional intelligence to be able to really feel and experience what some of these other people from different races that, you associate with or you're in front of on a daily basis are experiencing. And through their lived experiences, then you can better prepare yourself and handle these situations in the workplace that the virtual reality experience creates for you to really improve yourself and others. So I will post a link in the description below so you guys can check that out. If you want to know more about Dr. Robin Rosenberg, I will post also a link to her website. She's got bio and a lot more interesting and fascinating stuff on there as well. Thank you guys for tuning in this week. Remember, stay safe, be confident. We'll see you next week.